Chapter 98 Words as Fragrance. The damp odor mixed with the fishy smell of blood began to ferment outside the cell at the end of the tunnel, and a pair of men and women who had been falsely in love in bed a month ago had long since switched roles with each other. Fan Xian looked at the woman's miserable appearance and frowned slightly. At first he thought that he would have a wonderful affair with this woman just like what was written in the Ming and Qing dynasty novels, or maybe he would take her home just like Bai Lu Tian. Who knew that the story would have ended hastily before it even started? However, there was nothing to sigh for, since the other party was going to kill himself, if at this time, as Mr. Fei Jia had said back then, casting excess sympathy, it was actually a great irresponsibility to himself as well as the people around him. Greeting those two resentful gazes, Fan Xian explained gently and calmly, I think that such things as life can be mastered by oneself. That's why I gave you the poison. You should know that your death will not be of any benefit to me. So there's no need to look at me with such a gaze. I still pity you, but I won't feel guilty. The heads of my 3 guards were slapped into rotten watermelons by your people. Who would feel guilty for their deaths? He waved his hand. Maybe you don't believe me. I used to hate this god, thinking that I had done good things all my life, but ended up with the most miserable ending. If hate worked, this god would probably have been hated by me with millions of holes. So I have since realized that while you still have the ability to take control of your own body, you must feel thankful that you still have days to live. Xi Li remained silent, only gently lifting her wound-covered hands up, not letting them come into contact with the rough thatch. Miss C, think about it. Nothing in this world is as important as your own life. Fan Xian said calmly, you're from Qing, yet you're selling your life for Northern Qi, and you're able to give up so much, so I don't think it should be for the sake of money, but rather for revenge or something like that. I don't know if those rumors about you in Kyoto are true or not, but if you want to do something, you have to make sure that you're alive, and if you want to stay alive at this point in your life, you'll have to pay a certain price. Xi Li raised her head violently. The light in her eyes, though dim, was like the fire of the underworld in a grave, never refusing to be extinguished, and only after a long time did she clench her teeth and say, how do you guarantee that I'll be able to live? Fan Xian's spirits lifted, and he half squatted down, saying, you just arrived in Kyoto today, and I was able to come to the heavenly prison to interrogate you, so you should be able to guess my position in the supervisory court. Siri shook his head feebly. Do you think I would believe you? It has nothing to do with believing. Fan Xian said gently, this is supposed to be a gamble, only now you are more passive because between life and death, you have no choice. Xi Li's gaze wandered somewhat helplessly, as if she was somewhat moved. She turned her face and looked at Fan Xian's clean and beautiful face, but for some reason, she thought of the two of them intertwined on top of the courtesan boat late that night, and a wave of unjustified hatred surged through her, and she pounced like a madwoman, spitting a mouthful of spittle into Fan Xian's face. Fan Xian sidestepped and avoided, very surprised. Obviously this woman looks at the heart defense will be loosened. How suddenly changed a face. Where does he know, regardless of the past life, regardless of what kind of occupation, this woman's mind is always like the bottom of the sea, fine needles, mountain sand, as difficult to touch, difficult to catch. Fan Xian was slightly annoyed, his brows as clear as the first willow furrowed tightly, his face kept changing, not knowing what he was thinking. When he thought of the suicide of the senator last night, and then thought of the one in Wuzhou who was also feared to be dead, he knew that the other party had struck hard and fast if he wanted to catch the person who really wanted to deal with him. It seemed that the only one who could do so was the mouth of Sariri, and if the confession came out too late, I was afraid that the one who was in contact with Sariri would have died, or departed, as well. And torture seems to be in a short period of time is not enough to make this Northern Qi female spy's nerves collapse. But unfortunately now Fan Xian needs is time, otherwise even if you stay for a few days, what is afraid of? It looked like he couldn't get anything out of her. Fan Xian seemed a little disappointed, stood up from the fence, as if to prepare to leave with Wang Qinian. Suddenly, he took a deep breath, frowned and stood back in front of the cell, looking coldly at the woman through the fence. Wang Qinian looked at him with some surprise. Fan Xian's voice rang out clearly and faintly, tell me who did this, and I swear in the name of my ancestors in this world that I will absolutely release you. The answer was a deathly silence, but Fan Xian refused to die, a pair of gradually gentler eyes watching Si Li's face, watching Si Li's bloody hands held flat against his chest. The humidity in the heavenly prison had a musty smell, and the fence and time between Fan Xian and Si Li seemed to be starting to mold as well. I don't know how long it had been, but Si Li was still biting her lower lip and didn't say a word, and it was obvious that deep down inside her heart she was also engaged in some sort of extremely painful struggle. The bottle of poison that Fan Xian had thrown to her was a celadon vase, and at this moment, under her hands, on top of the hay, it was lying quietly, seemingly emitting some sort of very bizarre flavor. After a long time, Fan Xian sighed and seemed to give up, saying one last thing to Si Li before he left: "The way you hold up your hands is very much like a cute puppy." Later on, Wang Qinyan had always felt that Mr. Fan was a bit neurotic, still able to make fun of the enemy's scouts in that situation. Fan Xian himself, however, had no such self-consciousness and had spoken purely subconsciously at the time. Of course, he didn't know what effect his casual remark would immediately have and what it would bring him later. Sariri was slightly stunned when she heard him say that she looked like a cute puppy. To everyone's surprise, what immediately followed was this female spy's puff of laughter. After a lost laugh, her face changed for a while, not knowing what she was thinking, just feeling her spirit was incredibly relaxed at this moment, as if all the burdens had been lifted after this laugh, and her entire soul began to timidly hide in her own shell, cautiously praying for survival. Her body was like soaking in warm hot water, very comfortable, and truly began to miss the good things in life. So she slowly raised her head, her somewhat pale lips slightly opening and closing, and uttered 3 words: "Mr. Wu." Fan Xian heard clearly that it was Mr. Wu, and after a moment's stunned silence, he looked back to Wang Qinyan, who nodded that he had heard of this name, and only then did he breathe a sigh of relief, and a faint excitement surged to his heart. He reached into the fence, and in Si Li's puzzled gaze, retrieved the small porcelain vial containing the poison from the hay, and said to her, "Thank you." Then he turned away. Sariri seemed to understand something. Her blood-covered hands gripped the fence tightly, and screamed ruefully in a hateful voice at the departing back, "Don't forget that you swore an oath in the name of your ancestors." After the heavy iron door closed quietly and silently, the supervisory Yuan prison returned to the calm and gray. Here the prisoners generally cannot be closed for a few days to go to hell, so the remaining prisoners is not too much. So at this time, the deepest part of the tunnel vaguely came from the sound of a few crying voice seems very clear, very miserable. A while later, the head of the cell respectfully and incomparably pushed a wheelchair out of the secret room. Chen Pingping was sitting in the wheelchair and resting her eyes, when she suddenly opened her eyes and asked, "What do you think of this Tishi I chose?" He was naturally asking Fan Xian. The head of the cell thought for a moment, hard-hearted and ruthless, he's only half of the picture. Which half? The hands may be spicy, but he's still a gentle little man at heart. Chen Pingping smiled, a trace of relief surfaced on her aged face. So it's good, so it's good. A gentle heart with ruthless means is always better than a ruthless heart with rotten means. At least the mistake hit the wrong way to get the news from the mouth of Sariri. The head of the cell calmly asked, "How does Sariri deal with it?" Chen Pingping thought for a while and said lightly, "Watch for a while. If it can develop into one of ours, try it. If not, naturally kill it." No need to answer to that fantasy. I am prepared to hand over this courtyard to him, but since he doesn't have the ability to do so now, there is naturally no need for him to know too much. Yes. The jailer answered and added, "One place is already ready to depart." Chen Pingping coughed twice. At this time, the entire court thought that he was still stranded in the palace, and no one could have imagined that he had come to the heavenly prison alone. It was not easy for him to cough better. He signaled the cell head to push himself out, and after closing his eyes and thinking for a while, he said, "That Mr. Wu, since he has already forced the death of Seneschal Fong Darren, it is estimated that he would have left Kyoto long time ago at this time, and I am afraid that he would not be able to make it in time." The head of the cell shrugged his shoulders. He was the organizer in charge of the affairs of the 7 divisions back then, and never looked down on the efficiency of one division, and there was no fun to be had in investigating cases like this. So he wasn't very concerned about being able to catch that Mr. Wu, and just looked at the long tunnel above his head, and said with a bit of a headache, "Sir Dean, next time, you don't want to come back and eavesdrop on me, and it is really hard for this wheelchair to move up." Chen Pingping smiled. He came here today after coming out from the palace. He just wanted to see what that deceased son is like nowadays, and whether he has the ability to take over everything he prepared for him about the assassination on Yolan Street. He didn't put it much in his mind as well as Wu Zhu. It's only a small matter, and if Fan Xian died like that, he naturally doesn't need to worry about it much. Rather, looking at the qualities that Fan Xian had displayed in dealing with the incident was the more important aspect. This was a small test. Fan Xian did not know this, and hurriedly left the heavenly prison with Wang Qinian, learning from him that Mr. Wu was a famous schemer in Kyoto, only always hovering between the second prince and the crown prince, and did not seem to have any obvious inclination, but according to rumors, there was a frightening figure of this middle-aged man behind many things in the official world. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows slightly, his good-looking face slightly heavy, knowing that the other party was an old fox, and would definitely think of cutting off all the clues, and by this time might have already learned to run away to whichever mountain to go and live in seclusion. The so-called schemer likes to do this kind of thing the most, wait for 7 or 8 years, when things fade out, and then run out of the ass, continue to throw a bellyful of bad water. How can we be sure that what Si Lili said is true? Wang Qinian asked him for guidance. Fan Xian calmly replied, "It's very simple. If that Wu Bowen is still in the capital, then it's not him, and if he's already run away, then it's him." A very simple judgment, perhaps the closest to the truth of the matter. There are too many things in this world that are complicated by the stupid heads of humans. Wang Qinian said nervously again, "Then is it really necessary to release Siri Lili?" "Sir, you currently do not have this kind of authority, but earlier again. Although the people of the supervisory yuan have always been disrespectful of ghosts and gods, but for the existence of such ancestors is incomparable respect." Fan Xian did not answer him, and only thought in his heart that his own ancestor in this world did not seem to have much to do with himself. He knew that it was inconvenient for him to step in again at this time, so he asked Wang Qinian to notify a place, and Mu Tai, knowing his identity, should believe what Wang Qinian said. When the two parted ways, Fan Xian's jaw very stealthily nodded towards the darkness of the street corner, confirming the name Wu Bowen to that person. After arranging these things, Fan Xian slept back to the Fan Mansion, climbed over the wall, and lay quietly on his bed, waiting for tomorrow's news. When Wang Qinian entered the supervisory yuan, he was beyond surprised to find that his colleagues in one place were already fully loaded and ready to go, and was not surprised when Mu Tai looked at him with a slight smile. That night there is no business in the capital. Fan Xian returned to the fan house, greeted the people, then entered into a secret room that he asked his father, carefully took out a small, well-sealed leather pouch from his bosom, and poured the small green porcelain bottle out of the pouch. This bottle was made of green sand craftsmanship, and the air eye was a bit larger than normal porcelain, so it was big enough to hold some light ecstasy, and earlier, in order to let Si Lili relax his guard, Fan Xian had really spent a lot of effort on it. Taking out an earthenware jar from the corner, he opened the lid, and a pungent fragrance nearly made himself a little dizzy. Sinking the small green porcelain vase back into the pot, Fan Xian returned to his bedroom, legs twisted around the thin silk quilt, and fell asleep with some apprehension. The next day Wang Qinian came to return, some ashamed to say that Wu Bowen has long since left the capital. He has long expected this, and is not very disappointed. There is a manor about 18 miles away from the capital, far from the snowy peaks of the Tsanshan Mountains. Even if it is already early summer, the manor is still very cool. The grapevine has already spread its leaves, a green moderate eyes. Fan Xian asked with great difficulty. Wu Bowen, at this time, is sitting on the grape arbor in a relaxed manner, looking at the opposite young man, with a slight hint of reproach, said, "You should not come." The young man across from him was Lin Gong, the second son of the Chancellor's family, who looked at Wu Bowen and said extremely politely, "Mr. Wu is going to be forced to leave Kyoto, so it is only natural that my little nephew should come to see him off."